Okay, the first question is, so please share your story with us briefly. How did you come to Mongolia and how did you meet and fall in love with a Mongolian person?
Okay. I'll give you the short version. So I came to Mongolia in 2010 as a tourist, and I wanted to go on a horse riding trek, and Mongolia had the most horses and the least expensive vacation package. So I was okay. Mongolia is good, and I felt like doing a horse trek in an Asian country might be more comfortable for me as an Asian American than if I went to the UK or Ireland or some of the other countries that do like horse tourism. And when we went out to the countryside, the tour company hired a driver, and then I had a translator who went with us on the trek and translated with our guide. And the driver was just, the most beautiful man I'd ever seen. And I was like, and I'll tell you, I walked around UB and I'm like, oh my gosh, everybody here is so good looking. Like old men sitting on the sidewalk. I'm like, he is so handsome. Like everybody, the Mongolian people are just beautiful. But this driver was the most beautiful I had seen on my trip. And I just, but he was a driver. I was never going to see him again. So, it was just like, I didn't think about him, after that. But when I came back the second time, the driver was the same driver. I went back out to the countryside, but I also got to spend some time with the driver. And we fell in love very, very quickly. When I went back to Los Angeles, he called me maybe 2 days after I got home, and he spoke no English, and I spoke no Mongolian. And what he did was he had found the translator and took him to an internet cafe and made him call me on Skype, he called me on his phone and then said, go to Skype and we talked. So we did that for about 10 months, where he would, every time he was in UB, he would find the driver or find the translator. And the three of us would have conversations. But we were flirting and getting to know each other better and connect. And then after about 10 months, I decided I think I need to move to Mongolia. So my friends were right. Going back was important, but going back, I had fallen in love with Mongolia, and then when I went back, I fell in love with a Mongolian man. And 9 years later, here I am.
How many children do you have now?
One child.
Okay, so that's the brief story.
Yeah, well, it wasn't as brief as I meant to be.
Okay. I bet that translator felt like a third wheel.
Yeah, I think so. Because I would have to say, we were talking like boyfriend and girlfriend. Like, so poor guy, he had to translate, and he would say, to one of us, she says blah 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 blah, and then he says blah 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 blah.
Yeah. Okay, so when you first came to Mongolia, what was the biggest culture shock for you?
I think I didn't realize how heavily influenced, like I didn't understand the history with Russia. So I kind of thought it would be more Asian, and I lived in Korea and I went there every summer as a kid, and so I think I felt like some of it would be more Asian, but I guess in that sense it wasn't so shocking. Like the realities of Mongolia weren't so shocking to me, but there are things that whenever I get like, I would be surprised about something, I would find out, that's a Russian thing. It's not really, So yeah, I think that's what's surprising is the mixture of that Russian influence and Mongolian culture.
I mean, food and everything, right?
Yeah, I knew the food I wasn't gonna like it. I knew that already. I don't love Mongolian food. I like spicy things, and I like a lot of vegetables and things like that. So I knew that was going to be an issue. But I thought maybe beforehand that there would be an even mix of Chinese influence and Russian influence, and I didn't realize how that really wasn't the case. It was very, very strong Russian influence, very little Chinese influence. None at all, really.
Yeah, I think the 80-year influence under the Soviet system that explains it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I needed to be better informed about the history before I came here.
When you first told your parents and friends that you're marrying Mongolian guy, what was their reaction and what was the first thing they said?
Well, I didn't move here thinking that I was going to marry him. So there's that. But when I first moved here, I didn't think I was going to be marrying him. I thought I was just moving here and maybe I would live with him for a while and then we would see how things would go. But on the day we arrived in Darhan to our apartment that he had rented, his family was all there, and I was very surprised. But I think that maybe he was understood that we were going to be married, and so his family welcomed me like they would a bride. So they poured milk over the threshold, and they gave me this these greetings, and then the women had clothes for me and took me into the other room and got me dressed and brushed my hair, and I smelled very bad. I was very dirty. I had been stuck on a plane. We had been stuck in the Moscow airport for mechanical problems. I felt so gross, but they made me feel so welcome, and I didn't really understand what was happening. I just thought, wow, they are really, really friendly. And so I didn't quite understand. But we got married. I moved here in February and we were married in May. But I told, as soon as I had an internet connection, I told my parents, oh my gosh, I just met his entire family and this is wild. And my mom might have been the first to say, oh, what was that, ceremony for? And I was like, I don't know. And then I only found out maybe a week later or something that they had assumed that I was coming in as, a daughter, to be, right? That I was going to be joining the family.
When Mongolian people learn that you are living here and married Mongolian guy, what was their reaction? What was the first thing they ask?
I think they're always surprised when Mongolians find out. I think that there's one, because I'm an American woman who married a Mongolian versus a Mongolian woman who married a foreigner, there's a very different reaction, right? Like, I think Mongolian women get judged very harshly when they marry foreigners. Mongolian men are almost congratulated.
Yeah.
Right? Like oh, good job.
Good job.
Wow, that's so great. But Mongolian women don't experience that, and that's something that, is very problematic to me. Yeah, and it's an idea that, my husband did well, right? Like he got a good bride who's a foreigner. So I get a little uncomfortable sometimes when that happens. I think also there are some people who are just genuinely happy, right? Like if they're not thinking about those issues, then they're just happy that that I fell in love with Mongolia and a Mongolian. Like they have pride in their country, so they're happy that there's a foreigner who loves their country the way they do. So it's two sides, and I think the reaction is different in the countryside and in the provinces. I think that they're a little more welcoming, but I always have to, whenever that question or whenever I get a reaction, I always have to wonder about the other side of that conversation. Which is when a Mongolian woman decides to marry versus a foreigner versus a Mongolian man.
I think that explains our mentality, because we are very proud of our history and culture heritage. So
yeah,
that explains it. So have you been traveling Mongolia and been to countryside?
Yeah. I mean, living in Darhan, we go to the countryside often, and some of my husband's cousins are herders, and so we go to the countryside to visit them quite often. I've only traveled as far as like the provinces. I've been to Bulkan, Hufskul, Stilink. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I guess Tok province, yeah.
Uh-huh.
But I have not traveled very far. And my husband, because he worked, for a tour company, he worked as a tour driver for almost 15 years. He's been to every part of the country.
Mm-hmm.
So, I always kind of like, oh, take me, I want to go. He comes back from his trips and he has pictures and like, oh, I want to go there. The problem is my work schedule doesn't allow for a lot of vacation time. So I stay very busy. But as a family, we've traveled abroad together, maybe almost as much as we've traveled to other parts of Mongolia. But I'd like to visit Bayanurki, I'd like to go to the Gobi, Darnot, I'd like to go out there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I want to go, but I have plenty of time. We'll be here. And, with the border closed,
yeah.
I thought I would get to travel more, but
yes,
but not so much.
Uh-huh. So I grew up in the countryside and Zahong province. So I was wondering, from your perspective, what you observed about the nomadic herders, their mindset, their attitude towards life, and their philosophy. Have you thought about the nomadic herders, because it's our traditional way of life, and the city life is like really different.
Yeah, I think it's the one thing that I love, that I'm so grateful for is that my family, we go out. My daughter loves baby goats, so we go and see the baby goats in the springtime, and when they're combing for cashmere, and my husband helps with the hay harvest, so we go out around that time. In summertime, we have like a family nadam, where all the family gets together. Those are really special experiences for me. And, I think about, people who come and they pay thousands of dollars to go, watch another family do that, to go experience nomadic life. And that's just our family's life, that's just what they do year in, every year, over and over,
Yeah.
But what I love is that the children in our family are being raised to value those traditions and that way of thinking. And, those traditions, I feel like, are that very modern, modern in the way that it's still happening today, of preserving traditional nomadic values, taking care of the earth so that the earth can take care of you, taking care of your animals because they take care of you. I think when you think about concepts like that, it expands the way that you think about taking care of other people, right? So it's, then when you meet a stranger and they need something, or they're hurt, or they're hungry, you take care of them, right? I mean, in the countryside. And that's not the attitude in the city, right? It's not how people live in urban environments. It's like you see someone who's struggling, you look the other way because, I don't want to, that's not my problem, right? And I feel like it's a different mindset here, or in the provinces a little bit. So people take care of each other here in a way that's very special. And I think it goes back to the nomadic values, and the one thing I always find funny is, people who don't know about Mongolia really, but they've seen, videos, or, they think, oh, I want to go to Mongolia and just have solitude and live in a ger in the countryside and just, be peaceful and alone. You can't live like that in the Mongolian countryside. You can't live alone. You depend on your family. You depend on your neighbors. You depend on, there is no, but it's that individual, sort of mindset that would kill you if you lived here.
Yeah.
If you tried to survive a winter alone in a ger, you would die. You would never survive. So I think that the togetherness, the collective thinking, the reliance upon one another in a healthy way is a really important just value for the way you live your life, you know. And I think that's something that is very special and unique.
If foreigners go to countryside, they see this gears, one gear just separated by kilometers, but they are really a tight-knitted community, right?
Yes. Yeah. That's the thing. It's like, I think there's this strange, it's like, yeah, they get the wrong idea. I mean, you know, even if you hang out in a herder's gear and you're not living here, right? But if you stay here for a while, every other day, the gear will have visitors, right? Like, there will always be someone dropping by to check in and say hello, or, you know, to ask a question. It's not a life of solitude and isolation, you know. But in comparison to the way, you know, people live their lives in urban settings, okay, sure, you know, because you're not going out onto a street with thousands of people on it and going into a store with, you know, hundreds of people.
Okay, let's talk about food again, because when foreigners come to Mongolia, they are like surprised by how much meat we eat. Meat and dairy, so that's our two main things. But there are a lot of other foods. So, as your experience living in Mongolia, what food is the best, and what food you can make the best, and what's your favorite?
Well, I was actually vegan before I moved to Mongolia.
Wow.
So, yeah, so for 17 years I didn't eat meat or any dairy products. So when I came here, I thought, you know what, this isn't going to work quite the way I want it to. So I tried to eat, like when I went to the stores, I would try to find things that I could eat that weren't meat and dairy product. But living with my husband, I was like, okay, he's not going to eat this. So I made the decision that, you know, if the meat I was going to eat was coming from the countryside, which most of it was, you know, because our family has animals, I really don't like mutton, like sheep or goat meat. I will not eat horse meat because I have a different relationship with horses. So that left me with just beef. I could eat beef. But what I thought was different, you know, the difference for me was there's a big difference between a Mongolian family that eats beef from a cow that they raised, that they helped to grow, you know, into, you know, old enough to where it could be butchered, versus like an American just going to McDonald's and getting a hamburger, you know, whenever they want. So for me, there was a different economy of meat eating and a different economy of dairy products. And so I was able to sort of, okay, my past beliefs about the consumption of meat and dairy don't really apply here in the same way. Now, there are a lot of vegans in Mongolia too. So, you know, I understand, you know, certainly there's a way to do it, but I decided I was going to give it up. But yeah, I'm trying to think. If I had to pick a favorite food, I guess it would be bods. I like bods if it's beef bods. I really like our MA's bods. So she makes the best bods. I don't make it because I can't wrap the wrappers. I make ugly bods, but I do make a good-looking child. So. Yeah, I guess my husband, of course, he loves soban. The problem is I don't make any Mongolian food. So when we have Mongolian food, it's always when my husband cooks. So he cooks about half the time. I cook the other half of the time. My daughter, she loves Mongolian food. She grew up here, and so she, you know, her when we would go to the countryside, she had a pacifier. Quickly, always my in-laws would give her a piece of sheep tail fat instead. And say, oh, this is what Mongolians use. So I said, you know what, that's fine by me. And she would come home and she would just smell like like the fat.
Yeah.
but she loved it. So she's grown up with that, with the taste for it. But she also eats. I make a lot of Korean food at home. Just some American food. So we have it's a little bit of everything here. But because there's so many Korean ingredients here, and Korean food is so popular, it's really easy for me to make Korean food here. So I make that a lot. And when we have family over here, I always try to make them something nice that maybe they've never had before. And
even as a Mongolian, I can't wrap the balls because it's not for everybody.
No, it's hard. I can't even make pretty hoshok. I can't make when it looks like it's braided.
Yeah.
I can't do it. I just pinch it together and it looks like mandu.
Mandu.
Like Korean dumplings.
Oh, okay. For girls, a woman watching this program, could you tell us about Mongolian men? Are they good husband? Are they good with everything?
Oh, I can't speak to all Mongolian men. I think that the one I found is pretty great. So I mean, again, there's Mongolians are like people all over the world, right? Like they're not all the same. They all have different life experiences and they have different perspectives. And maybe if they grew up in a house with a father around, or if they grew up in the countryside, or if they grew up raised by a single mother, like there are so many different, just like people everywhere. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I will say again, like, I knew from the first time I visited here that, Mongolia has very good-looking men. Mongolia has very beautiful women. But you have to get past the surface of that, obviously. So, yeah. There is a problem, and certainly, in Dahan, this is a problem where, there's, like, employment opportunities are difficult, right? And so you see a lot of, and I hear from a lot of my women friends that, we struggle with, men that are, if they're not able to work in a job that, they feel that they're happy in and that they're getting paid a good amount and they feel pride in their work, like it leads to a lot of depression, which can lead to drinking, which can lead to more problems. That is a definite problem here, and it's something that, needs to be addressed for things to change. And certainly here also there's a history, where there are a lot of women of a certain age that were able to go to university, from the countryside, who were able to go to university and work in fields, education or business, engineering, that maybe some, men of their age weren't able to do, right? And my husband comes from that generation too, where, everything collapsed and the schools went away, everything went away. Mongolia had to rebuild itself in a different way. So there's kind of I feel like there's a lost generation a little bit, right? Like people from that, and men maybe in particular of that generation suffered a little bit differently, right? Than the children, I don't know. I feel like there hasn't been a lot written about it yet because it's still very recent memory, but I think that that's going to be something that later on, sociologists and Mongolian, sociologists are going to look at and talk about more, and historians and say, what kind of impact did this have?
Mm-hmm. I also grew up during this post-Soviet times, so I remember how things were hard and it was very confusing, chaotic times, and I think most of the Western people don't know about these times because post-Soviet time was like transition from one system to another system, and it hits people really hard, and some really struggles a lot of people. So back again, you featured in MNB World's program. A lot of people recognize you. Are you famous now?
Yeah. Sometimes I get what's actually really sweet is that, and then an MNB keeps airing it, and nobody really said anything until MNB, because it was on MNB World, and then MNB gave it Mongolian subtitles, and then aired it on MNB. And so then lots of people, I would just be out at the store or something, and someone would come up and, start speaking to me, and I'm like, do I know them? I don't know if I know them or not. And then they would mention, I saw you on MNB, and I'm like, oh, hi. And then, but what is very sweet is that a lot of my, when I first moved here, I was teaching English, and so a lot of my former students have messaged me on Facebook, after seeing it, and saying, "Oh, teacher, I'm so happy. I'm so happy to watch that video, and that you're still here in Darhan, and I'm so proud of you." So it's been very lovely, actually. It's been, there was no negative feedback of any kind.
So I always thought that we are more relatable to Russians than like Korea, Japan, and other Asian countries, and people coming from foreign countries don't realize this. They think that Mongolia is just another Asian nation, but we have this unique culture that mixed with Russian culture with a nomadic culture. So it's a very unique culture that can't be found from anywhere. I think that's the case.
Yeah, I think to some extent that's true, but also to another extent, like. I don't know. My father. He comes from my adopted father that I grew up with. He's Russian. I grew up in Los Angeles. I remember the time when we met my Russian cousins who had just immigrated from Russia to the U.S. in the 80s, and I just thought they were the weirdest people ever. The little boy was crazy and wild, and I didn't understand. Culturally, that was the first time I had ever interacted with Russians. And when I came here, I actually feel, that my Korean background and time in Korea, and even in the Korean countryside, right, it's actually more similar. So there's some things to me, yes, culturally that are Russian, and certainly, the apartments and the stores and, the way that the architecture and the bureaucracy and the systems are very Russian. Those are harder, when you asked about culture shock, that's the shock, is having to change to kind of fit with those systems. But the Mongolian side of that is sort of familiar to me. Koreans have lots of the same superstitions and beliefs, right? Koreans have maybe a lot of is about, when women give birth and when women are pregnant, that are very similar to Mongolian beliefs and traditions. I grew up with Korean Buddhism to some extent, so Buddhism here, although it's very different, it's the Tibetan or Mongolian version of Tibetan Buddhism. I understand a lot of those practices more than I do Korean practices now, right? Because we having lived here, and my husband is Buddhist too, but yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. I think if you don't know all of these things about, if you're a foreigner and you've been to Asia or, Korea or Japan or China, and you don't really know all of those things, and you aren't there long enough to really understand those cultural practices and traditions, then you may not pick up on the similarities. But there are a lot of similarities. The way that Mongolians take care of family and their elders, and to me that's very familiar, from a Korean understanding. The way that they value children and take care of seniors it feels very familiar to me as a Korean American.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and I don't know enough about Russian culture to know how much of that was I feel like that's more Mongolian than it is Russian, right? So to me it's the heart of Mongolian culture is very Asian. The reality of Mongolian life has that stronger Russian influence versus an Asian influence. But to me the culture is very at its heart, the values and things, that virtues are very Asian.
So, for foreigners that planning to come to Mongolia, what advice would you give for not tourists, for people who are planning to live here, for organization, for a job, or maybe marrying Mongolian? What's your advice to them?
Oh, I would say you have to have an open mind. You have to have an open heart. And you have to lower your expectations, right? The expectations, the standards are different here. So, even though, we talked about time and with this hush, like that applies, differently. There's a different business culture. There's a different, customer service culture. There's service delivery culture. Like it's all different. And I don't think it's necessarily bad or worse all the time, right? In some cases, I actually like the change. I actually think it makes more sense to look at time differently and not to be so, have to focus on productivity, right? I think building connections with the people you work with and having work that you take pride in is more important than some of those things. But on the other hand, I get frustrated every once in a while, and certainly, like going to the store, can be frustrating if you expect to find, certain things on the shelves, right? And but I think that you have to breathe, take a breath, remember where you are, that, no, you're not going to be able to find this on the shelf every day because that's not how the logistics of this country work, to import and export. And we're especially in the middle of a pandemic, you just have to, everybody freaking out about the eggs being out of stock, right? That's an example, with the pandemic, eggs disappeared and people were like, why can't I buy eggs anywhere? And it's well, because we don't have, there's only a handful of egg farms and they don't make enough eggs in the wintertime to give, to meet the domestic supply or to meet the domestic demand. And the border is closed, so all the Russian eggs aren't coming in. You have to, living here, you just have to remember geographically where we are and what the limitations are, and then also historically, right, what the limitations are going to be, and that you just have to deal with things as they happen. And not everything that we know from back home is better. Some things, there are different priorities here. People have different priorities in life, and I think that's actually, something that we as foreign residents can learn from and benefit from. Now, I think that there are also some things that we can bring and as different standards and different norms, right? So it's weird. There's a balance, right? You have to find the right balance between how much do you want to do it the Mongolian way and how much do you want to do it your way. And my husband and I have had a lot of those conversations, and in raising a child, right? Because there are things that he wants to do in a Mongolian way, and there are things that I'm like, no, we're going to do it the American way. Sometimes the Mongolian way is better, and I have to just say, you know what? Okay, you win this time. We can do it this way. But other times I'm like, no, I wanna raise, this particular issue is really important to me. She out of all of her cousins, she's the only one with a real bedtime, right? But I'm firm on that, I understand why her Mongolian cousins don't have a bedtime. Kids stay up late, and, especially if they live in a one-bedroom apartment or a ger, you don't go to bed. The kid doesn't go to bed. You don't put him in a room and close the door, and then everybody else, all the adults get to keep doing things. The kids just stay awake, they're just doing everything that their parents are doing. Luckily, I can put her in her room and she can go to bed and I can close the door. And I think my husband appreciates that now too.